Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So this is unusual for me. This is actually the second time that I'm recording this show today. Apparently, the first time I had the internal microphone on the laptop as the microphone that was recording, and it sounded horrible. So I am going to re-record the entire show because I'm not putting out a bad product. So this is Wednesday. It's the AMA. That means Ask Me Anything. And I only had one question this week, but it's one of these questions that I really have to dig into a little bit and remove some of the layers. The question is, SHA-256 is the method used to mine Bitcoin. Now, many people do not understand what SHA-256 is, but it is known that computers doing SHA-256 calculations are not directly creating anything useful. SHA-256 calculations do not produce anything useful, whereas the mining functions of CureCoin and PrimeCoin do, i.e. protein folding and discovering new prime numbers. Does this make Bitcoin an inferior currency? Well, let's actually unfold this a little bit and look at the claim that SHA-256 calculations do not create anything useful. Now, obviously, the SHA-256 calculation is needed to create the Bitcoin platform. It is needed to keep the blockchain running. So now, if one is to say that the Bitcoin platform and the blockchain are not useful, then maybe you could argue that SHA-256 does not create anything useful, but I think that the Bitcoin system and the blockchain technology are very useful. And without the Bitcoin platform and without blockchain technology, then arguably CureCoin and PrimeCoin would not exist. Now, I wanted to find out what the protein folding is, so I wound up sending a message to Brian Sovereign from Sovereign Tech, because he's, like the resident genius on tech stuff. Although, when I say resident genius, I mean, like I know the guy. I can, easily converse with him, and he also, fellow podcaster. So I consider him, in the podcasting world, he's the resident genius on tech sort of things. So I asked him if he could break down what protein folding is into terms that are easily understandable. So he says folding protein just means proteins forming or coming together, and proteins are the proverbial building blocks of life. CureCoin incentivizes the running of the software that helps places like Stanford University get through quicker protein formations to find out which formations are good or bad for the health of various life. You can run the software without CureCoin, but CureCoin is just an attempt to make it worth your while, as the software can be intensive on computers, Stanford's folding at home client. And he's got that in the bracket, so I'm guessing that's the software is Stanford's folding at home client. So CureCoin, in a lot of ways, is similar to Tor coin, only it's for scientific research. Tor coin is one of these alternative currencies that is used to incentivize people to use, or rather to run Tor exit nodes. And if you're not familiar with Tor, Tor is the onion router, which is, some people would call it the dark web. It's where sites like the Silk Road were hosted. There's the Agora Market, the sheep marketplace was on there, and there's other things that are on the dark web. I don't know exactly what they are. I have looked on there a couple of times, basically because I wanted to poke around the Silk Road before it was shut down. Never bought anything on the Silk Road, but I poked around the site a little bit. So Torcoin is basically, in some ways, similar to CureCoin, where it's a alternative currency that incentivizes people to run the Tor exit nodes. Now, you have to have an exit node in order for the traffic on the Onion router to actually connect to the rest of the internet. And because it's, the dark web, stuff that's happening on the dark web remains somewhat kind of encrypted until it goes through an exit node. So once it passes through the exit node, whoever is running that exit node could then be the fall guy for any of the traffic that happens on the dark web, if it's stuff such as people looking at child porn or some of the other stuff that happens, like hitmen for hire sort of things. So the person running the exit node they're actually running the risk of going to jail, even though they're not the ones that are doing the things. But as far as the internet service provider is concerned, because it's coming through that as the exit node, it appears that they are the ones that are doing all of these dirty things. So that sort of explains what PrimeCoin and the CureCoin are, but does not answer the question of whether or not I think that Bitcoin is then an inferior currency, because based on the biases of the question asker, SHA-256, which is what is needed to run the Bitcoin client, or not the client, but to mine Bitcoin and thus keep Bitcoin going, does not, quote, directly create anything useful. Now, as I said, that assumes that the Bitcoin platform and blockchain are not useful, and I would say that they certainly are. I would also argue that without Bitcoin, things like CureCoin and PrimeCoin would not exist. And really, the CureCoin and the PrimeCoin, they really only incentivize people to run other softwares. So they are not actually doing, much more than basically giving people pennies for using their computer to run another program. Whereas, I guess you could say that, finding a protein is more beneficial to society than keeping the blockchain up and running. I don't really know what the benefit is of finding larger prime numbers, other than for some scientists to say, hey, I found a much larger prime number than anybody else has ever found. But I will answer the question of, does this make Bitcoin an inferior currency, as soon as we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and Numery supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. That's fans.fppradio.com. Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorkFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily Liberty media. Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Before I finally give the answer of do I think Bitcoin is inferior to Primecoin and CureCoin and other alternative currencies that incentivize people to run other programs, let me first tell you about something that you can actually buy with your Bitcoin. You can buy gold and silver from Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. Since 1977, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling investment-grade precious metals. They take Bitcoin, and they now have forever removed the minimum order requirement if you pay with Bitcoin. And for now, I don't know how long this is going on, but they are doing free shipping if you use the promo code Bitcoin when you pay with Bitcoin at rrbi.co. You can also give them a call for some knowledgeable advice on investing. That's 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. So, I have made you wait thus far. I will now answer the question of do I believe that Bitcoin is inferior to Primecoin and CureCoin because those two things incentivize people to do something that is quote-unquote useful. And I will answer that by saying that I have in the past called Bitcoin the Roman chariot of currencies. Meaning that in 1,000 years, and it might even be sooner than that, but in some period of time in the future, people might not still be using Bitcoin as anything other than a novelty. However, they will be using something that was basically derived from Bitcoin. In the same way that wagons derived from chariots, and then cars derived from wagons because people found ways to make things better. Bitcoin is the Roman chariot of currencies, so I'm not going to say that it's necessarily inferior to Primecoin or CureCoin, but I will say that they serve different purposes, and that at some point in the future, people will not be using Bitcoin because something that is definitely superior has come along. So that was the only question that I had this week. But I do have some interesting news that I will be able to get into, because I'm sure unless you've been living somewhere without the internet for the last couple of days, you know that there was a decision from the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri. And I've got a story here from USA Today that is somewhat related, but at the same time it just talks more about grand juries as a whole. The title is Grand Jury Charges Are Easy, Except Against Police. The article, again, from USA Today, begins, New York State Judge Sol Watchler once famously remarked that it is so easy to get a grand jury to indict, they would indict a ham sandwich if that's what the prosecutor wanted, except when it comes to police officers. A grand jury proved that on Monday when it declined to charge a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, with the shooting death of an unarmed youth. The decision led to a wave of demonstrations and anger nationwide in the St. Louis suburb, The protesters turned violent when buildings were set on fire and more than a dozen people were hurt and 61 arrested. How, then, did this jury of 12 men and women come to decide that Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson did not commit a crime when he shot and killed 18-year-old Michael Brown? And they're actually asking the wrong question here. The question should be, how did the jury of 12 men and women come to decide that there was not probable cause that a crime existed when Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown? To understand that, you have to turn to the 24 volumes of evidence with almost 5,000 pages of testimony from 60 witnesses that the jury heard over the course of 3 months. That, and you have to understand human nature. Randolph McLaughlin, remember that name because he will be mentioned several times throughout this article. Randolph McLaughlin, a law professor at Pace University in New York and a trial lawyer who handles wrongful death cases against police, said, "People do not want to believe that officers do bad things. Society gives them the benefit of the doubt, and it's very difficult to indict a police officer." Then, the article writes, there was the evidence itself. The jury had more than 70 hours of testimony that included often contradictory eyewitness statements, clinical autopsy reports, police radio reports, scores of photographs and diagrams of the crime scene, and complicated forensic evidence about gun residue and bullet trajectory. Not among this, however, and this is me giving my 2 cents, this is not the article from USA Today, not discussed was whether or not Wilson had other means at his disposal, less lethal means at his disposal, to subdue Michael Brown at any point during the altercation. Whether it was at the initial altercation where something happened near the police car, or whether after Michael Brown ran away from the police car, did Darren Wilson have other non-lethal means at his disposal? And that's not something that is discussed here, and it's not something that I've heard really discussed in the court of public opinion. The article continues. It says, Wilson's testimony was among the most riveting. In almost 100 pages of testimony, Wilson gave a vivid and detailed narrative of how Brown punched him, went after his gun, and ran away, then ran back at him full charge. Several witnesses corroborated Wilson's account of of the account that Brown charged him. Others said Brown stood still with his hands out in front of him, as if motioning Wilson to stop, and at least one witness said Brown was walking backwards with his hands out at the time he was shot. Brown's friend, Dorian Johnson, who was with him during the altercation, contradicted Wilson when he testified that the officer was the aggressor when he grabbed Brown by the shirt at his car. He said Wilson and Brown argued, but his friend never went for the gun. He said Brown ran away after Wilson shot him and never charged. Witnesses disagreed about what occurred at the start of the altercation when Brown was next to the police car. Some said they saw his arms moving in and out and thought he was struggling to break free of Wilson's grasp. Others saw the same motion and concluded that he was throwing punches at the officer. There's more on this when we come back, and why it might actually be easier to indict a ham sandwich on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
You can support FPP Radio by joining the FANS program. FANS are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. FANS help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the FANS program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the FANS program, visit fans.fppradio.com. That's fans.fppradio.com. Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorcFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily Liberty media. Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Now, before I continue with the article here from USA Today on why it might be easier to indict a ham sandwich than a police officer, let me first tell you some ways that you can support the show indirectly. I have spoken at length previously about direct ways that you can support the show, such as the Fans program. But did you know that you can support the show indirectly just by shopping online, doing things that you would normally do? Whether it's buying website domains or web hosting, you can do that from Namecheap. I have an affiliate link at shop.fppradio.com for that. And they're actually doing some Black Friday specials. So if you have any of those websites that you definitely want to register, then, you know, if it can wait a couple of days, wait until Friday. Still start that process through shop.fppradio.com before going to Namecheap, because when you go to Namecheap through shop.fppradio.com, you wind up helping me indirectly by shopping with them. You can also shop from Amazon. There's actually a shopping iframe built into the page so that you don't even actually have to leave shop.fppradio.com to shop at Amazon. There's also links for Coinbase, so if you need to buy or sell some Bitcoin, or if you need some merchant services, Coinbase offers that for you. And there are a couple of other affiliate links there, all at shop.fppradio.com. So the article here continues. It says, some of the evidence presented to the grand jury included highly technical discussion about the difference between gunpowder soot versus residue and the distinctions between entry and exit wounds. Put together, all the evidence served to overwhelm and even confuse the grand jury, and some legal experts said that they questioned why St. Louis prosecuting attorney Robert McAuliffe would choose to do it that way. Ben Trachtenberg, a University of Missouri law professor, stopped short of saying that McAuliffe laid out an overwhelming amount of evidence to keep the grand jury from charging Wilson. Trachtenberg says, I'm not prepared to say it's improper, but it's certainly unusual. It certainly looks like he put on a much greater amount of evidence than we're used to. Normally, Trachtenberg says, a grand jury sees and hears much less evidence before being asked to vote on an indictment. He said in many cases, the grand jury can see evidence in a few minutes and then take a vote. That's because the prosecutors simply need to establish probable cause. They don't have to present the entire case. On the other hand, prosecutors bringing what they consider a weak case before a grand jury might present more evidence because that could save them from losing in court. He says nobody wants to get an indictment that you can just barely get, because then you get smacked around in the real trial. Trachtenberg noted that the grand jury saw evidence that helped bolster Wilson's version of events and not evidence that would secure an indictment. Joel Schultz, a retired police chief of Adams State University in Colorado. And I scrolled down too far here. Hate when I do that. Retired police chief at Adams State University in Colorado, who is a consultant and trainer, defended the prosecutor's decision to provide the grand jury all of the evidence. If McAuliffe had not presented exhaustive evidence, critics would have accused him of withholding information that could have affected the case. He says it was not a terribly unusual kind of investigation or kind of hearing. Let me drop down here a little bit. Remember the McLaughlin guy that I mentioned earlier? He is brought back up here. Pace Law Professor McLaughlin suggests Wilson had an alternative course of action after Brown ran 8 to 10 feet from the police vehicle. He had already called for backup, but the officer made the decision to get out of his car and give chase. McLaughlin says such a high-profile case should have gone to trial in an open court so everyone could see the evidence as it was being presented. They wanted to do it in secret, and I don't trust any process done in secret, he says. The grand jury process represents a conflict of interest for prosecutors who have to work day in and day out with the police to make their cases stick. Prosecutors may not present their strongest cases against an officer as a result. The prosecutor rarely interrupted Wilson during his grand jury testimony. McLaughlin says at a trial, prosecutors would go after the officer. He would poke holes in his testimony. Here, the prosecutor just basically let him tell his story. So a grand juror puts himself in the shoes of the officer and thinks, what would I have done? The article here continues. It says it doesn't add up for Brown's family either. We saw how unfair the process was, said Brown family lawyer Benjamin Crump on Tuesday. We object as publicly and loudly as we can on behalf of Michael Brown Jr.'s family, and that this process is broken. The process should be indicted. Crump said Wilson's testimony does not fit his injuries and other physical evidence. He accused McAuliffe of defending Wilson rather than prosecuting him or failing to put his best case before the grand jury. Crump says, why change the rules when it's our children dead on the ground? Now, I hope for the Brown family's sake, I do hope that there is some semblance of justice for them. I know that it's not going to come, here with the grand jury because they decided not to indict. There's still the federal investigation that is going on. And there's also the possibility of a civil trial to where Darren Wilson could be held civilly responsible for the death of Michael Brown. Again, I don't know if that's something that is necessarily in the works. I don't know necessarily, how that would wind up working out for the family. But I do hope that they can get some sense of closure, because I could not imagine being in their shoes, knowing who the person is that killed your son and having no real way of finding justice. And that's certainly, it's not going to make their life easy, especially living in the same community with the guy. Now, obviously, Darren Wilson has, it's been in the news that he's working on some deal to wind up resigning from the police department. Don't know if he's going to stay in the Ferguson area. If he's smart, he won't. But you never really know. And again, hopefully for the Brown family, there is some sense of closure at some point in the near future. Tune in Friday for another episode of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. And remember, every Wednesday, AMA.